Welcome. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Madeline Coons, and I'm the International Director of Communications and Fundraising for the Jesuit Refugee Service. A few notes for a successful event. The event will be in English. There will be simultaneous translations into Spanish, Italian, and French. You can select your preferred language in your meeting controls at the bottom of your screen. Click Interpretation and then click the language that you would like to hear. Please note that this event is being recorded and will be made available to rewatch after the event. For those of you here in presence, please know that we will be taking photos. If you do not wish to be in a photo, please let a member of staff know. They're strategically positioned around the room, and most of them have JRS lanyards hanging around their necks. Thank you again for joining us today for a discussion around the future of the protection and shared humanity as JRS and the launch of our 2025 annual report. At this moment, I am especially thinking about solidarity, how we connect and assist each other during a time of deepening global fragmentation, international aid cuts, growing indifference towards displaced populations, and in the midst of emergencies, like our colleagues and those we serve in Venezuela. We've become numb to the images we've seen, and our own societal problems have begun to eclipse those of what we see outward, and thus our ability to fathom and walk in the shoes of another, especially those forced to leave their homes. At times, this often seems impossible. Despite this, at JRS, every day we witness the impact of the collective actions taken by staff, refugees, communities, and partners alike to pave a way forward, giving new life to the idea that we all have a role to play for a more just world where everyone is safe. In the theme of global partnership and collective responsibility and action, to dive deeper into this discussion, we are honored to be joined by Mr. Mohamed Daoud, co-founder of Refugees in Libya and cultural mediator here in Italy, Dr. Andreas Frick, General Director of Miserior, the German Catholic Bishops' Organization for Development, Dr. Filippo Grandi, former UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Mr. Andreatsu, our JRS Eastern and Southern Africa Regional Director, and Brother Michael Schupf, our JRS International Director since 2023. You can find and download the annual report on our website, www.jrs.net, and there are copies available for those of you here with us today. Please feel free to share it with your friends, family, and anyone else who you might feel interested in learning more. To set the tone, I would first like to welcome Father Arturo Sosa, Superior General of the Society of Jesus, for our opening remarks.
Dear friends, good morning, good afternoon. I don't know really exactly where we are, but anyway, welcome to this house. I am delighted that the presentation of the Jesuit Refugee Service annual report has brought together so many partners in mission. I'm grateful to see JRS staff, Jesuit companions, women and men religious, institutional partners, members of our networks and friends of the mission gathered here today, whether in person or online. Your presence reflects the shared commitment that sustain and strengthen the work of JRS around the world. I am confident that today's conversation will inspire meaningful reflection and renewed dedication to the mission of JRS as we seek to respond faithfully to the challenges of our time and advance the values of dignity, justice, and reconciliation. JRS remains a vital expression of the commitment of the Society of Jesus to love and accompany the poor, the weak, and the excluded. Aligned with the universal apostolic preferences of the Society of Jesus, showing the way to God, walking with the excluded, journeying with Jews to a hope-filled future, and caring for our common home, GRS co-creates a diversity of spaces with forcibly displaced people where together we may journey towards transformation through reconciliation with God, with ourselves, with others, and with creation. The mission is intimately connected with keeping hope alive in the life of forcibly displaced people who embody profound human suffering and resilience. This was always the vision of GRS founder, Superior General of the Society of Jesus, 1965-1983, the servant of God, Father Pedro Arrupe. Father Arrupe was a man profoundly guided by hope. Despite a life marked by encounters with human suffering as a consequence of violence, from helping the people of Hiroshima in the immediate aftermath of the atomic bombing to addressing the needs of those in refugee camps and inspiring the Society of Jesus to put in practice the orientation of the Second Vatican Council. He, Father Arrupe, profoundly trusts in God's presence in human history and work with faith to contribute to a more just world where dignity of every human being is respected. His spirituality was deeply rooted in a faith that does justice. Father Arrupe wanted to render a service that was human, pedagogical, and spiritual. This intuition established GRS as a new mother apostolate for the Society of Jesus, as a whole of great importance for today and the future, and of much spiritual benefit also for the society. As a Jesuit apostolate, GRS creates conditions for welcoming the stranger, fostering right relationship that heal divisions between refugees and the communities that host them, as well as within refugees community themselves. At the heart lies the transformative experience of listening to and being with all involved. By discovering our common humanity, we open new possibilities for imagining a different and better future together. In this way, we could build truly transformative relationship through which we come to recognize God's presence and action in our world enacted through us. This vision of Father Arrupe of being with refugees and other forcibly displaced people rather than just doing for them continues to guide GRS to this day. Its mission to accompany, serve, and advocate the refugees and displaced persons is rooted in an ended deep faith in God's presence and in God's promise to be with us always to the end of the age, even in history, in his moments of dark and most tragic moments. We are currently living through such a moment, not an easy one. The needs are great. Across the world, humanitarian crises are multiplying. Border policies are becoming increasingly deadly, and hostility, exclusion, and the dehumanization of those forced to flee are reaching alarming levels. It is in this context that Pope Leo's recent words resonate with particular urgency. What kind of world have we built if so many brothers and sisters must risk death to seek life? These words make clear that the responses require goes beyond political solutions or charitable action alone. It requires a profound conversion of hearts and minds, calling us to turn to Jesus and the path he shows us. We should bridge divides and foster a culture of fraternity, move beyond indifference, fear, and suspicion toward genuine encounter, compassion, and solidarity. In responding to these defining signs of our times, the Society of Jesus continues to consider GRS as a formidable instrument for its mission of reconciliation and justice. Walking alongside forcibly displaced people remains a contribution to build a future that protects dignity and is grounded in shared humanity. Again, thank you, all of you, for journeying with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Father General. Thank you for taking the time to welcome us this afternoon. I know you have a very busy agenda today, so we're grateful for this time with you. Now, we would like to hear from Mohamed Daoud, a Sudanese refugee and cultural mediator based in Italy, as well as a dedicated advocate for the rights and protection of forcibly displaced people. He is the co-founder of the organization Refugees in Libya. We are honored to have him share his story and perspective with us.
Well, it may seem for so many of you it's a very normal, unusual today, but for me, it's really fundamental and historical moment, not only because I stand before you today to speak about the annual report of JRS, but because of what I have become today because of JRS. I'm sure this is a moment which my father would be so happy and glad to see me opening this annual report after so horrible situation that we have passed. So I'm really sure that GRS would be capable enough to deliver this message, which he would be staying and seeing me from the detentions or refugees camps. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to take you in a tour back to my early younger days. It was in 2003 when the war has broke my hometown, Sudan. I was at age of 6. It was a time which every child in this world needs to go to school, to raise in a good situation, to understand what is peace all about. But I never had that moments. If you ask me at that time, what is war? I could barely explain that meaning, but I exposit about it. I witnessed people screaming. I saw others escape, and I see so many children, women who fall down. But even if I could not understand that meaning or explain that situation, I could see there is something wrong. I could see there is something not good. After that whole time, I fled, and instability and insecurity took me all the way, crossing borders, arriving to Libya, and co-founded Refugees in Libya organization. Those of us who managed to arrive by their different ways to Europe or to Italy, they said never again. They continue to speak to bring the voices of voiceless people who are stuck in Libya and beyond Mediterranean. We, or those of us who arrived in Italy and Europe, they understand that they are so very common European people really not understand what is happening beyond Mediterranean. In that regard, we come united. We, after having this horrible experience, we said never again. We will bring that voices. We committed to speak as usual as today in conferences in order to have some help, some vision, some stories that could be recognized, such as my story. I am speaking today. This is not only a story of a person. It's a story of a child who believed in him later that he could survive it, even if he is surrounded by criminals, instability, and insecurity. It's a story. It's not only a story of Muhammad Dawood, but a story of thousands, hundreds of Sudanese, of children who flee war and constantly fleeing till today. That's why I'm really grateful today to thank GRS, because I met GRS not only when I arrived in Italy or in Europe, but also I met before long ago, who later I go to school by GRS, I go to university with GRS. I remain wondering, for those who not have this chance to go to school, and I wonder myself if I did not have such opportunities to go to school. That's why there are so many children who need peace, who need chance to go to school, who need only to remind themselves that war is not a good. War is something that's so horrible. Today I am stand before you, not only to bring such stories, but also to demonstrate that what is the willing of peace, what is a dream about, to seek for safety, to seek or to bring those who committed crimes against humanity. For me, it's a story very fundamental that to stand on behalf of you today, to demonstrate that the security, it's something very fundamental. The protection, it is something very important. Not because to seek to stay for safe, but also to have a school, to have a family, to stay at home, to come back when you're out. So it's just really important that GRS and so with other partners to still engage, to bring peace, to help to those who need peace, to help also to those who need really security. I know that GRS, it is not in a small organization. According to what my experience, GRS can be something very united. If the common people understand that to support GRS, what we doing or what GRS with all its actors and participants are doing. So really thank you so much for this hearing.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. You said you want to thank JRS because you saw the power between the you saw the power in the hope, no? In the people that you met. I want to thank you on behalf of JRS because you give us the compass for our work. So I feel, in that sense, your life is really exemplary for what protection means and why protection is necessary. Why it is necessary to have functioning protection systems. You told us what it means in your everyday life, to be able to go to school, to be able to go to home, to your family, to be able to build a future. And this is what I think we in JRS also are fighting for. How can we get beyond a mere and constant struggle for survival? You experienced this in Chad, but also in Libya. It's just about getting to the next day. How can we ensure that the access to protection is actually a right that people can enjoy? These are the questions that I think you bring to the table for us today. But I think there is one more question. You were able to study with the help of a scholarship, which is not something which is given for everybody. And looking back at it, you somehow call it a bittersweet experience. You say, it is something that rescued you, the education. And at the same time, when we were speaking, you say, it is something that reminds you of a stolen future. So protection is not simply to survive or to not die. It's about an environment that allows every one of us to construct a future. This is the second question that I take from your intervention, from the address that you gave us. And the question for us is, how can we guarantee this perspective in the new humanitarian environment that we are expecting since 2025? So let me briefly introduce this topic for our discussion. I think it's clear by now that we find ourselves in a new world order, that is characterized by severe humanitarian cuts of development funding as well. And we find ourselves with an increased number of people who flee violence and conflict. Because simply violence has increased as much. If you look at the Global Humanitarian Assistance Report for 2026, you will find some benchmarks that speak for themselves. International humanitarian assistance has contracted by 29.7% just in the last 2 years, from $47 billion to $33 billion in 2025. So it stands at the lowest within the whole decade. And projections anticipate that it's going to go down even further. If you look at the different types of humanitarian crises, funding has been cut for almost every crisis, with the protected situations being hit the hardest. So those who already find themselves in a very unfortunate situation are the ones who are hit hardest. Millions of people have been removed from the access to humanitarian aid through the so-called hyper-prioritization processes. And those processes respond to a scarcity of funding by simply removing 152 million people in need, meaning people left out from receiving humanitarian aid. These cuts concern not only the basic needs, which are very important, but to the same extent, they concern humanitarian development and peace funding. So areas which actually can help overcome violence, war, and destruction. Those numbers are impressive numbers. And I think Mohammed would agree with me, they transport a message to the refugees, to the forcibly displaced, that is also clearly received in our experience as JRS. The message is, solidarity is no longer a priority and no longer affordable, in some cases not even a basic minimum. How the message is received is, you are no longer a priority. So these numbers are not simple budget figures. They are very technical expression of policies of disregard for the most vulnerable, and therefore dehumanizing policies. In addition to those funding cuts, we observe the increased closure of borders with refoulement, the externalization of asylum processes, and very low resettlement numbers. These days, I recall an expression, a quote from the philosopher Hannah Arendt. And with the experience of the Shoah, she says, we became aware of the existence of a right to have rights and a right to belong to some kind of organized community only when millions of people emerged who had lost and could not regain these rights because of the new global political situation. Our experience in Jesuit Refugee Service shows us that we cannot pin the dignity of one person against the dignity of another. Peace is something inclusive, not something exclusive. Protection does not mean survival, but finally it means belonging to a community with full membership and recognition. Today, in this event, we ask ourselves how we can best accompany, serve, and advocate for refugees in this new world. and also how we ourselves, as citizens of this new world, can and want to live in it. Which are the solutions that we can develop, driven by hope? Before we begin the panel, I would like to share with you a video from our country director in Mexico, Karen Perez. We asked Karen, how do you experience the way people are forced to live after the humanitarian aid cuts? What do those aid cuts mean to the people we serve and encounter? And how can JRS be present with those facing displacement and vulnerabilities now and in this new future?
Mi nombre es Karen Vanessa Pérez Martínez. Soy la directora nacional del Servicio Jesuita a Refugiados en México y llevo aproximadamente 8 años colaborando para esta organización que ha tenido una evolución durante muchos años con respecto a la movilidad. Y quiero arrancar conversando, compartiéndoles cómo hemos vivido desde el año 2025 a la fecha los recortes financieros que hubo directamente en la ayuda humanitaria. En México, por su ubicación geográfica, miles de personas han pasado por territorio mexicano para poder llegar a los Estados Unidos. Pero desde el año pasado, con la crisis financiera global y el impacto directo en México, el JRC ha identificado innumerables personas con necesidades principalmente humanitarias. Es decir, este recorte ha impactado en el cierre de organizaciones, de albergues, el recorte de recursos, la desaparición presencial en las fronteras, además con esta política de desgaste, deshumanizada, principalmente dejando en desamparo a las personas con mayor grado de vulnerabilidad, niñas, niños, adolescentes, mujeres y hombres. Es importante para nosotros reconocer que estos recortes han significado un golpe muy duro para las personas, principalmente en su atención psicosocial, en su calidad de vida, en su salud, en su toma de decisiones. Las personas actualmente se encuentran varadas en México buscando una oportunidad para poder esperar alguna respuesta, pero también para poder integrarse a la comunidad mexicana. Desafortunadamente, todas estas personas se encuentran desesperadas, desesperanzadas, con emociones muy desgastadas, por lo que ha implicado incluso la separación familiar de quienes habían atravesado selvas, ríos, bosques para poder llegar a sus lugares de destino. Para las personas que nosotros hemos atendido y escuchado, que han sido de más de 110 nacionalidades, es importante decir que el JRS ahora acompaña para poder llevar sus procesos para quienes quieran solicitar protección internacional, pero también para todas estas personas que ahora están viniendo de vuelta. El JRS ahora, pero también pensando en el futuro, sigue apostando por este acompañamiento integral, humanitario, cercano, de escucha que permita a las personas tomar decisiones claras para poder seguir formando su vida en un lugar en paz, con tranquilidad y con esperanza. Además de esto, quisiera cerrar y compartir que para nosotros desde México, el equipo actualmente se encuentra con mucha voluntad, acompañando, pero también sirviendo, defendiendo, apostando a la defensa de los derechos humanos en medio de esta crisis global.
So our big thanks go to Karen and her team. I visited about a month and a half ago, and I can confirm the commitment, and also that it's very risky for people to do that work in these circumstances, both for themselves, because of the stress, but also in terms of security. And it kind of shows us, together with this experience, where our own humanity is at risk. The challenge is how we respond to those situations. I would like to introduce now our first speaker of the panel, Filippo Grandi, who sits next to me. Filippo, you have served as the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees for 10 years, from 2016 until the end of last year. You have served prior with other UN organizations. I know you have a heart in the Near East and with the Palestinian refugees, where you were with the UN Refugee Agency for them for quite a number of years, but also in many other parts in Africa, in Asia, and in the Middle East. And last not but least, very early in your career, you also have volunteered with JRS in Thailand with Catholic Relief Services at the border with the Cambodian refugees. Filippo, I think your commitment, your contributions to international humanitarian aid in all those functions have been really exceptional. We are honored to have you here today. Please take the floor.
Good afternoon, buon pomeriggio. Thank you, Michael, for your kind words, and it's a great pleasure to be here at JRS and to help talk about this important report and all that it means. As I read the highlights of the report, I was actually struck by a story that is in it. For those of you who have read it, I'm sure you've seen it. It's a story told by a JRS employee called Simeon, or Simeon, I think. And it happens in Nigeria, and it's about him witnessing two children threatening each other with knives, two children, and how the story is about how he intervenes, talks to the children, and somehow talks them out of an act of violence. And the anecdote, the story, which is quite dramatic and quite important, I think, is really about, as it is put in the story, children with knives and versus against or opposite to children with pen, children with education. I think it's an anecdote, it's a story that is very apt, is very adapted, unfortunately, to our unfortunately very violent world in which even some leaders, even some big leaders, seem to prefer knives to pens these days. And I also want more technically, and this was mentioned by Mohammed, by Michael, by Karen, I want to contrast this with the recent emphasis by some donors, especially the United States, but also other donors, on humanitarian aid having to focus exclusively on what they call life-saving activities. Of course, humanitarian aid saves lives, must save lives. We must just understand correctly, I think, what saving lives means. And I think that the report, the JRS report, explains this very well. Saving lives happens through first aid activities, food aid, health, water, shelter, you name it. Of course, that remains crucial, especially in today's world, given the number and gravity of conflicts, how it affects civilian, think of Ukraine, of Gaza, of Sudan, as Mohammed told us, and many other places. Think of Venezuela now with the earthquake. But saving is much more than that. Saving lives is much more than that. It is about, as Michael said, giving opportunities. It is about ensuring inclusion, especially of people on the move. It is about helping people find motivation for life. It is about promoting social cohesion through reconciliation, as the Father General said. It is about upholding rights. It is about addressing the climate causes of displacement. All of this and much more, I believe, is what I would call protection. And sorry if I sound a bit polemic here, I think that this is what the exclusive, narrow, life-saving focus wants deliberately to marginalize and weaken. And that's why we need to fight back and not allow this to happen. I've had, as Michael mentioned, quite a long journey working with refugees and displaced in my life, and also other people affected by wars, by crises in many ways, and the communities hosting them. And I did start as a volunteer in Thailand many more years than you care to know, starting with NGOs, including an experience with JRS in 1987, up to the time of late when I was the head of UNHCR. And I have learned through this journey to appreciate not just that refugees, as Mohammed explained so well, are always start from and end up often in very difficult situations. But one thing always struck me, that people who leave everything behind, homes, families, work, friends, school, must make some of the most difficult choices of any people. This is something that is often forgotten. Uprooted people make very, very, almost impossibly difficult choices. And that's why I think, even more than any other reason, that's why a life of opportunities, a life of contributing to communities, hosting them, a life sometimes going to third countries through resettlement, although that has been narrowed to very little figures by now. Sometimes a life of being able voluntarily to return home, a life of hope and not of despair, a life of respect and being respected. In short, a life of dignity is what uprooted people want and deserve and must have in order to live and not just to survive. And this is why protection work in this broad sense is of capital importance. Protection is a very much used word today, sometimes a little bit overused, if I may say. And of course, protection in itself is a very broad term, but I think it indicates some very specific sets of issues. And I want to elaborate a bit on that, if I may. First of all, protection is about legal work. Obviously, there is an important element of that to ensure that the rights of those displaced are respected, and to ensure that the laws of countries are, to the extent possible, consistent with those rights. This is one of the main tasks of the UNHCR, of IOM, and of other big organizations. But protection is also education, is also helping people access work, is also, for example, supporting the mental health of those displaced. It is also community engagement to address tensions, fractures, to ensure social cohesion, as I said. This is a very basic protection issue in refugee settings. And I have to say, not because I'm here to advertise, but because I'm convinced that JRS in all these activities excels and makes the best use of the support that some of you I know are providing to JRS. And I have seen this myself in many places. And one big feature that allows this to be effective is JRS proximity to people. When I was a volunteer for JRS, it was not a long, it was only a few months in 1987. I worked in a refugee community, and through surveys and dialogue, we were supposed to determine more precisely the needs of these people in a specific area, which was food aid. So we discussed, what people ate. We discussed what they could find or not find in the market, how they cooked food. So very granular, very individual. That's proximity. And that's how JRS works in so many parts of the world. I think protection is key at, this type of protection is key at this most difficult time as resources shrink and principles, as we heard, are coming under threat, as we have seen in the past years. And I want to tackle briefly both aspects. First, talk about resources for a bit, because it has been mentioned. I think to focus on opportunities and not just on life-saving is not only right, as we have already mentioned, but also actually useful, given the scarcity of humanitarian funds. More sustainable responses that come from building opportunities for people are actually very much needed in the situation where humanitarian resources are getting, as we heard the statistics, less and less. And sustainability of aid, including financial sustainability, comes from the success of these opportunities. Good integration, voluntary, durable returns of refugees for those who can go back home. All of this needs investment, and both are actually underinvested at the moment. Think of integration program here in Europe, even in this country. This is so obvious that they are underinvested and neglected. Think of big returns that have happened legitimately in the past couple of years, like Syrian refugees back to Syria, a file that I know quite well. And that's a very underinvested, which is very short-sighted, because from this solution to refugee problems, sustainable solutions, come also not just better situation for people, but stability and security for entire region. And on protection, that's resources. On protection, a few thoughts. Obviously, we must be concerned by all these steps backwards that have been mentioned. The walls, the pushbacks, the legislative restrictions that we see every day all over the world. We see it especially in rich countries, but by imitation and extension, we see it also in other countries. Unfortunately, almost everywhere, largely for political reasons, because we know that anti-refugee and anti-migration policies are big vote getters today, but that's all they are, really. And in the meantime, they violate the rights of people, and they do not really solve anything. Not even things for which they are ostensibly being put in place, like stopping disorderly movement. So, it's really a dead-end avenue. So it is key to respond at the level of principles. It is key to ensure to invest in the legal aspects of protection, reiterating the basic tenets: right to seek asylum, non-refoulement, all the things that you know already. It is also important to follow the new responses, sometimes called innovative responses, that states are crafting. Some unacceptable. You remember the position we took, for example, on the Rwanda-UK agreement. Some, however, I think more open to examination. And I think that we must remain open-minded in that area in order to continue dialogue with states on these particular issues, because there are spaces in which we can perhaps innovate and remain in the realm of legitimacy. But I think it is important to also reinforce protection at the operational level. I have been saying for a long time, and not all my very orthodox protection colleagues in UNHCR were always very happy when I said inclusion is the best form of protection. Inclusion in education systems, for example, or health systems, in economic activities, ensuring that people have documentation. I called all of this inclusion. And I think that these are all aspects of protection. We must ensure that inclusion is ensured by law and in very concrete terms in both aspects. And this is where it all comes together, right? Life-sustaining activities are also crucial protection tools, so fundamental for many solutions, to reduce the burden on host communities, to provide alternatives to dangerous journeys, to diminish the need for humanitarian resources, and much more. And this, by the way, is, as you all know, or many of you will know, the gist of the Refugee Compact, of the Global Refugee Compact, which UNHCR promoted in 2018. Just to remind, the compact is not a legal document, although it is completely rooted in the Refugee Convention and in other legal instruments, but it is a box of many new tools to innovate support to refugees and by extension displaced people, with a strong emphasis on inclusion and on solutions. A word on the importance of partnerships, which is a key tenet of the Global Compact on Refugees. And I'm talking about across the spectrum partnerships with NGOs, civil society playing a very key role, including, I want to mention this, partnership with the private sector. Private sector can be very helpful as a partner in promoting protection through work inclusion, through technology, through promoting integration, and even in promoting advocacy for refugees and migrants, countering populist narratives, highlighting the positives of refugees and migrants in demographic and economic terms. For example, this is an area in which I would certainly encourage JRS and all other refugee organizations to pursue. And I'm very glad that JRS did participate, was an active participant in the Global Refugee Fora, the two that we had, which were a spin-off, as you know, of the Global Compact on Refugees. To conclude, this is, I should say that, although I'm not the High Commissioner for Refugees anymore, in a few days, in fact, we will observe the 75th anniversary of the 1951 Refugee Convention. I can never remember, but my colleagues will know if it's 28th or 29th of this month of July. I think, these anniversaries are what they are, but they are opportunity, and I hope this is one to reflect, to advocate, to persist, and to innovate our work so that, above all, we can ensure that people on the move and people hosting them can live lives in dignity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Filippo. I think your opening remarks, they give a roadmap for our discussion later. And the question will be, how and what can we put in practice? How do you see the role of JRS in this roadmap? Before we go to that point, I would like to introduce our second panelist, Andreas Frick. He is the General Manager of Miseria. Miseria is the largest development organization of the German Catholic Church, with a budget of more or less 230 million euros every year. And you're also linked through Miseria to many of the international topics, including forced migration. And you're represented on the Council of City and other organizations where you actually discuss these issues. Miseria was founded in 1958. So actually, it is still a post-World War II experience. And the experience was that we are called to live in solidarity with the disadvantaged. This is, I think, the key of the mission of Miseria, the essence of its mission. And it builds on a famous speech by the then Cardinal of Cologne, Frings, where he demanded worldwide solidarity, especially in the fight against poverty. So Andreas, your knowledge, your experience, I think demonstrate both the impact, the care, and also the collective action that is possible. We are excited to have you as a part of the discussion today and look forward to your opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Germany is not always the same as you might see in football. Yesterday I was blocked in a motorway for 4 hours, so I had to come this morning, but it was possible. But a couple of weeks ago in the train, which was very late, happened a very interesting spontaneous discussion with a father of 4 children. And after a while, he told me very proud, last week, my 6-year-old boy was asked by my father-in-law, "Do you have foreigners in your class?" And my son answered, "No, we are all children." And I start with this spontaneously, more politically. Dear colleagues, dear partners and friends, distinguished guests, dear Michael Schöpf and dear Filippo Grandi, dear Mahmoud, and all you are here. It is a true honor to join you today at the launch of this annual report. And in this deeply timely conversation, the future of protection and shared humanity, walking with refugees against the odds. 75 years of the Refugee Convention, that is a milestone worth pausing on. But let me be honest about the reality we face today. We are witnessing more and more protracted crisis, while simultaneously states are retreating from their funding commitments for humanitarian and development efforts as well. German government. The impacts are visible firsthand in the field in refugee and IDP camps around the world. Container structures stand empty, abandoned by many NGOs and international organizations that once filled them with life and very concrete support. People in need remain, often trapped in a state of limbo with nowhere to go and no safe prospect of returning to the countries they were forced to flee. Meanwhile, host societies are facing mountains of pressures, worsening economic conditions, rising living costs, dynamics that fuel polarization and harden attitudes toward refugees. And Europe, once at least in part a beacon of protection and international law, is increasingly turning to third country solutions, outsourcing responsibilities, applying double standards, avoiding the difficult but necessary political work of addressing migration and asylum at its own soil. Pope Leo's recent visit to the port of, I don't know, pronounce it very well, the Canarian Islands, Argentine. Anyway, the place Pope Leo has been on the Canarian Islands was a powerful and painful reminder. Europe cannot claim to uphold human dignity while allowing the Mediterranean to become an unmarked grave. Already in 2013, Pope Francis sent a powerful message with his visit to Lampedusa, and yet the decade since has been marked by a steady weakening of refugee protection and respect for international law. So, is there still reason for hope? I believe there is, but hope in this moment must be honest and concrete. This convention was born out of devastation, out of the ruins of the Second World War. As a German, I carry a particular sense of responsibility and gratitude for the lesson drawn from a war initiated by my own country. For me, this means Germany should be among the strongest defenders of the convention, fully committed to the value to value it enshrines. Yet recently, this commitment has too often fallen short worldwide. Across many countries and political contexts, conflict and wars dominate the agenda. In Europe, debates on defense are crowding out those on protection and humanitarian action. National interests are gaining ground, and empathy is increasingly framed as a weakness in political discourse. From both a Christian and a human rights perspective, this is deeply troubling. The Refugee Convention depends on compassion, political conviction, and a strong sense of international and communitarian global responsibility. These qualities have been in short supply. This is precisely why the Convention remains such a milestone. Looking honestly at today's political realities, it is hard to imagine that international community agreeing on such common ground or even similar language if it were negotiated anew today. This is a scandal. This is therefore a bittersweet anniversary, a moment that calls not only for reflection, but for renewed commitment to defend the convention, its values, and the empathy at its core. The reception of refugees has never been easy. Texts from decades and centuries past show that societies have long struggled with fear, prejudice, and misconception when faced with newcomers. No, Grandpa, we are all children. And yet, some of the oldest texts of human mankind remind us that hospitality and respect for the stranger are fundamental to a shared humanity. The Bible tells so many stories of people fleeing persecution, among them Jesus and his family. The call to welcome the stranger runs through scripture and through the traditions of countless cultures and faiths. As a person of faith, I feel deeply that my beliefs and the principles of the Refugee Convention draw from the same well, the call to care for, to protect, and stand in solidarity with the most vulnerable. Later today, we already heard the wonderful witness of Melia. Thank you very much for this. I came to know that even people in all the fear buried for a while the Quran or the Bible to hope in another moment to find them again, because faith for so many people is the hope, and they cannot afford the hopelessness. So thank you very much for this particular witness. For me, this is one of the most powerful symbols of hope and human dignity I know. My strong impression is that refugees and more broadly, people arriving in new places often believe in the openness and potential of host societies more than those societies believe in themselves. I think this is especially true for the Europe I know today. History shows us societies have been most prosperous and most creative when they embrace the talents, aspirations, and knowledge of newcomers. There is hope and opportunity on both sides of this encounter, but it can only flourish if fundamental rights are respected. So what does it mean concretely to walk with refugees? For me, it means three things. First, ensuring that those in need are seen and supported. Protection on the ground is essential. The dignity and agency of every individual must be respected in countries of transit and arrival. Miserios partners such as GRS, and GRS is the most famous for us and very, very well known and beloved, provide legal assistance, psychosocial support, and emergency aid, often in contexts where formal protection systems are weak, inaccessible, or simply absent, and where people face exploitation, violence, or arbitrary detention. Second, supporting community-based approaches. Displacement does not only affect individuals, it reshapes entire communities, generations. So many people, many of our partners work to strengthen social cohesion, support host communities, and create spaces where refugees and local populations can live together in dignity. This work is quiet. It is not unglamorous. It is unglamorous, and it is absolutely essential. Third, advocating for rights-based policies. Beyond project work, we engage together with our partners in advocacy to challenge policies that externalize responsibility, restrict access to asylum, or prioritize containment over protection. Humanitarian action must go hand in hand with political accountability. And in this work, GRS has been an outstanding partner, sharing a vision of a world in which all people can live with dignity, committed to those most marginalized, working to overcome poverty together, displacement and injustice, so that people can find hope in communities built on justice and solidarity. Human beings are all created in the image of God. Human dignity is inviolable. This is first sentence of the new German constitutions of the Second World War, not because there was no violation or because there was violation. Let me close with this. The 1951 Refugee Convention is being challenged as perhaps never before, and yet it remains a precious document, one that upholds dignity and humanity even under immense political pressure. In today's climate, it is hard to imagine achieving anything comparable, let alone anything stronger. That is precisely why we must defend it firmly, clearly, and without compromise. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andreas. It's a statement of conviction, and I think it's a statement of shared conviction, which is, in my opinion, one of the strengths that we have in the present situation. Let me introduce our third panelist, who's going to join us online, Andre Atso, JRS Regional Director for Eastern and Southern Africa. He's calling in from Nairobi and has 21 years actually already of serving refugee communities with JRS. So Andre, welcome to this room here.
Thank you.
And good afternoon, because it's almost the same time zone.
Good afternoon.
You live in a region where you have one of the oldest refugee camps in Africa, Kakuma, and one of the most protracted situations that actually have suffered a lot from the recent cuts and policies. You live in a region where you have 30 years of experience of integration of education programs in northern Uganda into the local system and into the local communities. And also in your region, you have the recent experience of the past days, no? And you witnessed very large, very dangerous anti-immigrant and anti-refugee demonstrations in South Africa with demands to deport people immediately. You have the whole range of experiences. Listening to Filippo Grandi's roadmap, where do you see opportunities and where do you say, well, this is really where we hit our head against the wall?
Thank you, Michael. Thank you all the panelists, Filippo and Andreas, who happen to share the same name with me, I think. Describing all these countries and the context in the region, I will say that first, to start with, I do believe that also protection is providing opportunities. And these opportunities is to ensure that, people we serve, people we accompany are fully embedded into life, and then they have this opportunity for themselves to be able to feed their family and provide for their family. If I take the case of Kakuma in terms of roadmap, we have also to ask ourselves in the midst of this funding cut, why we have education system, where maybe we have half of the teachers have been reduced. The question we ask is, what kind of protection or education are we giving to the children? Where we have children not coming to school and left on their own, we need to look into seeing how these children will be able to get a better opportunity. So for me, when I look at the situation in Kenya, for example, the only encouraging thing which we can look at is the inclusion, which also Filippo mentioned, the inclusion into the government system, into the social service system, and Kenya is taking a good approach into this, and we need to uphold it, because in the face of this cut or shrinking of funding, unless we promote the inclusion, will not be able to move forward. And then second, working with communities. And this is also very crucial. Being a protracted situation, and even if we look at GRS, even policy, when we said we shouldn't be in a place forever and ever, we should be able to build the capacity of the community, empower the community to take over. And this empowerment, building the community, what also we are, in other words, calling at times localization, I think is also a second opportunity for us to see how do we maneuver and provide protection to the people. Now, when we look at the situation in northern Uganda, they have had a lot of experience in terms of inclusion. However, there persist also challenges where we do still have school children not going to school, making the rise of us having girls being forced to marriage. So how do we handle this? How do we ensure that the livelihood, building the livelihood of parents, ensuring that they are able to sustain their family need so that the children, they attend to school, they attend to other opportunities. I think these are some of the things that we have to be looking into. And in Uganda, for example, I mean, we take Adjumani, but we take also Kampala, where we have seen a lot of rise in terms of people being traumatized owing to the cat people, or even I will call it a high rise in suicide cases, which is really something that call on us. How do we amplify? How do we strengthen the mental health protection situation? So that is where if I just give the case of Uganda, some of the things, but not only talking about mental health, but providing opportunities, livelihood, opportunities, resilience, so that people we accompany are able to feed their children, feed their community. The case of Southern Africa or South Africa is very heartbroken, looking into what is happening, chasing away the foreigners or undocumented foreigners, but it doesn't stop there. This is a situation where we need to amplify the advocacy component, talking about the right to legal documentation. When we were doing interview with some of the people we work with, one of the interesting things they mentioned is that we are not looking for maybe you give us training in this or training in that. What we are asking you is to fight for our right to have proper documentation so that we are able to show our capacity. We have skills, we have experience, all we need is support us in proper documentation, and then we will be able to survive or feed our children. So these are, in all the three cases you mentioned, some of the things that as GRS, we are working with people that we accompany, people that we day-to-day work with to be able to see in this situation, which is not very hopeful, but providing this hope, accompanying them in this difficult situation. One example also I want to give is, if you look at Mozambique, for example, we work with internally displaced in the northern part. Recently, we have had situation of insecurity where we had to close our program for 2 to 3 weeks. Mozambique, these are internally displaced people. They have displaced because of insecurity, but owing to another insecurity, they have to look for their safety. Again, what Muhammad said, if there is no safety, people will not be able to enjoy life. And we have to fight for this safety, this secure environment so that people can attend to their daily life.
Thank you very much, Andre. I want to take two aspects from your intervention. The one is about the role of communities. So if we experience an environment where the classical legal tools fail or are deliberately dismantled, no? Are communities really an instrument of protection in your experience? And how can they be an instrument of protection? That's the first question. And I think you have a direct experience in the forcibly displaced work, no? And you have a very direct experience in the work of development. Are they opportunities or are they a second-class mechanism of protection?
Well, I learn even better in these days and 2 years. I am Director General at Miseria, that where are no anymore United Nations soldiers, where journalists don't join anymore. Families are living, religious communities are living there. A lot of work is living there. So community at the basic level is of course the most protective, but we need all these little systems, need of course the hope that are integrated in so much better working functions. The Catholic Church among the Christian communities is a worldwide network which is able to pass informations as soon as possible, to express where people are voiceless and don't have a chance to express themselves. So and I don't know if you're referring to this, but I think it's very fundamental to understand our hope and the mechanisms we already know we have and to have been strengthened. Of course, all these communities not only need some hope and some friends in the world, but they need the basis of a functional state. Failed states are not able to protect anyone than some small communities, elites. But we need the idea of international law, which is giving empowerment for all difficult situations to have a more justice, division of power, and that function all the other aspects. So this is anyway coming from turning to the very roots and thinking it for worldwide information interest against all these very toxic aspects. We know that all the forms of egoism, that all the forms of greed, all the forms of disregard and indifference are destroying, but there is not only the hope, but structures of justice, of solidarity.
Yeah, I think, of course, the situations are very different, but and also it depends on what you mean by community, especially if you are a refugee. Who is your community? Is it the other refugees? Is it the hosting community? So, you have to distinguish. I think as a rule, to empower people to be resilient, irrespective of whether the environment is conducive or not, is a good investment, as we have all said, I think. And that is particularly useful if the environment is hostile, because then one has to fend for himself or herself. But there are many other ways also to empower the actual hosting communities. I've always been struck in my many years of going to emergencies, for example, how much the receiving communities are the first responders. Even before the state, the international community, the organizations that come at some point, the local community. I remember in Bangladesh, a very complicated situation, as you know, the Rohingya coming from Myanmar. In 2017, when the big number came, I went there just during the exodus. It was the local people who were bringing food and medicine, and out of really spontaneous solidarity. Then, of course, things become always more complicated. So how do you ensure that that solidarity remains? How do we invest in the hosting community so that they remain open? So there are many variations to that, but I think the word community is key here. Whichever way you look at it, investing in that channel is crucial.
And let me ask the second question, no, which also refers to what Andre said and which you referred to in your speech, Filippo. How do we fight back?
We fight. We must fight. There are, again, this is a difficult question. How do we fight back the rhetoric? The rhetoric is political. We all know that. There's no need even to tell our story ourselves, because I think here we all know and agree that it is a political narrative that has very specific goals to win the elections. And I think that we also have to agree, and this is maybe a little bit more of a extra effort that we have to make, that it is wrong. Of course, we all agree it's wrong, this anti narrative, but it is also profoundly useless. I said it in my introduction. The rhetoric of push them back, send them away. Now, what do they call it now? Remigration is a rhetoric that has no practical, even from their point of view. They don't get what they claim they want to get. I think we have to somehow unmask that uselessness more brutally and say, look, you've achieved nothing by that. You've caused a lot of damage. And by the way, you've also violated rights and diminished solidarity, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think we have to continue to do the work that we all do, that you all do, whether it is in the community, in the protection domain, in the legal domain, at different levels, and, not be discouraged by this rhetoric. The rhetoric will continue at every election in rich countries in particular. The rhetoric will continue. I have no illusion of that. And I think that, and I was discussing with some of you earlier, one last point. There are many governments in particular that are not particularly negative in that area, but because they have in their country a very strong let's call it populist political wing that is very vocal, anti-migration, anti-refugee, they feel that in order to neutralize that, they have to somehow move towards those positions. Now, one thing is realism and pragmatism, I'm all for it. One thing is to, how can I say, fake anti-migration sentiments in order to try to push away the more extremist people. It doesn't work. We have seen it, because the people who vote the anti-migrant and anti-refugees prefer to vote the original and not the copy, right? So that tactics, that political tactics that has been very damaging, because it has prevented important laws from being put in place. It has made many laws more restrictive. That rhetoric is really something that we need to fight. And those are interlocutors we can talk to. I think the more extreme people is very difficult to talk to, also because of their motivation. But the people in the middle that hesitate and out of fear move in that direction, I think that these should be the interlocutors that we sit down and show all the benefits of doing the right thing, also in practical terms. I don't know if that answers your question. I don't have a better answer, though.
Thank you very much.
Well, I concluded that I'm the oldest on this panel, so my capacity for fight is very limited. But I have my tongue, but the most important instrument to create the peace needed, to be clear in analysis, to be interested in people, to be interested to get new informations, to live and strengthen networks which are able to bring best informations, best facts. We need to fight out of clearness of interest. We need afternoons like this and annual reports at this to be full of information, and we need we need as well to be angry enough that if I, for example, have some meetings in the political Berlin of Germany, to be very outspoken, kind, but outspoken, and say what you are doing is destructing cultural aspect of Germany after the Second World War, it was not the German economical interest to be helpful to other countries. It was thinking that there was help to Germany after the Second World War, that we were able to re-enter in the United Nations in a certain sense. And now we are out of solidarity and intelligence to do as much as we can, not for German economical interests. So to be angry enough, to be outspoken, and in the different situations to find best arguments and next steps. So we need networks of different associations and mindsets, be full of humanitarian and intelligent solutions.
Let me give this question back to you, Filippo, because you have a lot of experience with the positions that you held. No? I think it's about a value-based approach, no, and also a personal experience of transformation. And I think everyone who has worked in JRS has participated in that. In your roadmap, you said we need to increase the partnerships that are possible on this basis. What would you recommend in this regard?
Well, thanks for calling it a roadmap. It was not meant to be, but I'm very honored. I just want to make a small observation to what you said, and then your question on partnerships. On value-based, yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think we have to always be a little bit careful and say principled and value-based. Principle mean, the former, many of you, those of you who are Italian know I'm talking about, but the former foreign minister of Italy and European Commissioner, Emma Bonino, always says, be careful about talking about values, because values are a little bit slippery. Principles, laws are written, and you have to, especially when you talk to states, right? Because even the populists talk about values. And this is where it gets very messy. Sorry, this is just almost a semantic observation, but I think it's an important one. Because in this area, humanitarianism, refugees, even migration to an extent, although a bit less, principles, rules are very clear, and states have subscribed. I think it's important to also hold states responsible, although not always. Many times it doesn't work. So that's what I wanted to stress. On partnership, I think this is fundamental. A few days ago, I was in Paris and I spoke to students graduating at Political Science University there. And I told them, and it was a big discussion. It was a big talk about power, authority, what to do as young people, especially young people dealing with studying political science, et cetera, economics. And, I said, surely I told them, you in your studies have observed how power in today's world is becoming very diffuse. We went from very bipolar world of the Cold War, then we had a fairly long period of almost unipolar US-led world. And after September 11 and all that's happened afterwards, we are really in a very fragmented situation in which power, even among states, is more diffuse. Then you have phenomena like internet, like artificial intelligence, like the rise of big tech that bring new aspects of power in the game. So everything is becoming very, very diffuse. So I think that everything that we do, even in responding, even in expressing solidarity, in helping the vulnerable, which we're talking about now, we have not to rely only on traditional power, the authority of the states, the resources of the states, but really multiply our partnership across society, across civil society, to the point where I would say if states have decided to abandon their leadership in solidarity, as many seem to have. The rhetoric today is anti-solidarity almost, as Andreas, you said earlier, almost like shameful, or Andreas said it, I can't remember, almost shameful to talk about solidarity. Well, let's take back solidarity and lead ourselves as civil society to show that, and that's an aspect of partnership. In practical terms, I think the compact, as I said earlier, really wanted to show that there are potential partnerships across the board which are very powerful. And this ranges from academia private sector, of course, the more traditional expression of civil society, the NGOs, the faith-based organization like JRS and others. So there is an array, an enormous array of strengths, of energy in society that I think, the time has come to really form alliances in different areas. Refugee work could be one of them, is one of them, and maximize, leverage the energy that comes, and that can actually be very strong. It's more bottom-up than top-down, as was the traditional aid model. But I think it's very strong. And by the way, it can, in the end, because you cannot, I think you said it very well, Andreas, you cannot do without the laws, the good laws, and the role of the state. But if the bottom-up power drive is strong, united, principled, etc., then it can also become a force to influence the top-down and the more traditional power sources like the states. I don't know if this makes sense. I'm improvising a lot, but
No. No, thank you very much. So only a short addition to emphasize the same thing. We spoke in the year of the Jubilee of the Refugee Convention. The protection which is meant there must not be understood as an act of charity, even if charity is very important for all of us, but as a legal obligation. This is the important thing, no? To point out that we have a right of rights, as you quoted, the idea of Hannah Arendt, and in the second edition, a second adding idea. The after-war Germany was very strong after all this mental destruction as well, that the new state started out of the idea that we need the unity of very pluralistic aspects in society, Christians, non-Christians, more socialist and more people of different traditions. Even with few Jews, we have a very strong and very powerful, very good Jewish culture still in our culture, to have a pluralistic understanding of everything, and out of this to have a society which is able to discuss, to analyze, to find new solutions, and to bring as well from our international traditions good ideas in the discussion we have. And this will give power to renew societies and discussions. I think I wanted to add it because I think it's not contrary, but complementary.
Thank you very much to both of you. Before we open the floor, and I think also the chat for questions, let me give one more question to Andre. Why do you see the role of JRS in shaping this future?
The role of JRS, I think it will start with also what Father General gave us in terms of the origin, why JRS has been founded, and accompanying, serving, and advocating. In this future, I think as we need to continue working with the people who need us. And how we shape it, in my view, is be truthful to our mission. And being truthful to our mission, regardless of all the challenges that are happening, we need to be there, be present, and also in accompanying the people we serve, be able to bring in the humanity. It is not just we receive people at our gate, or we just distribute food to people. We need to bring in the humanity, look them into their eyes and say, you matter to us. This is how we want to work with you. So that is one in terms of approach. And this humanity in serving, in accompanying, I think can be also a model to others. The second element which I can bring in is in shaping the future is advocacy. We have spoken, and I think Andreas and Filippo spoke about it. We speak about advocacy in terms of in a political arena everywhere. Here in advocacy is never stop talking about how people are suffering, talking about what we can do as humanity to alleviate this suffering and showing the way to people. I think advocacy remains a very key element in how we move to the future. And another point which I think Arupe, from the beginning, asked us to do is to help to identify the causes of displacement. I think this is something that we haven't invested so much in it, but we need to invest a lot into how do we make sure that the causes that make people to flee, we identify these causes and speak up against this. I think this is for me very crucial in terms of what in this global arena we can do. Now, when we come to regional or even local level, is our services, making sure that they are effective, quality services, working with communities, as I mentioned earlier, and attending to the right need. For me, these are things that are very concrete, practical, that we can do in the field, we can do at country project level, and also ensure that we work with other partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andre. And as we open the floor in a minute, Madeleine will give us a very quick impression of what we actually could do last year. So you're going to introduce the annual report, and it will give us an overview on the actions that we could take.
A heartfelt thanks to all of you on our panel this afternoon for sharing these important reflections and sharing your thoughts on how we might all move forward together in support of our displaced brothers and sisters. Now, allow me to take a look back at JRS in 2025. This year showed an unprecedented reduction in humanitarian aid, purposely excluding forcibly displaced people from accessing networks of support and opportunity. We will now see some slides from the annual report, which show the impact of our work this past year, work that would not be possible without all of you. In 2025, we accompanied and served over 1 million children, women, and men in 57 different countries around the world. The next slide, which you can also see within the annual report, shows a breakdown by the type of service that we have offered. Each of these numbers represents a personal story and a journey of hope for displaced communities. One of our biggest programs, Education in Emergencies, has developed to support 477,000 students. As part of this, in September 2025, JRS launched a 2-year EU-funded project to promote accessible education, serving more than 50,000 children in Borno State, Nigeria. By working with teachers, families, and students, JRS is building safe spaces dedicated to learning. Our education initiatives also incorporate JRS's mental health and psychosocial support program that aims to both uplift and empower communities inspired by JRS's whole person approach. This program, among others, prioritizes refugee agency and self-reliance, thereby creating long-term, sustainable opportunities for the future. Our reconciliation activities remained relatively stable as well, with almost 90,000 people served. This highlights that social cohesion and peaceful coexistence remain a strategic priority across many of JRS's operations, particularly in fragile and conflict-affected settings. And of course, our work would not be possible without you, nor would it be possible without the support and solidarity of our global family. Thanks to your generosity, even when impacted by drastic government aid cuts, our 2025 income remains strong. As you may see, 98% of these funds went to providing and managing programs around the world, aiding those who are most vulnerable to these recent changes. This is also reflected in our expenditures for the year. JRS directed more funds toward our initiatives in Western and Eastern Africa, where the humanitarian funding crisis disproportionately affected forcibly displaced persons in the global South. By adapting to address new and growing challenges, we can more effectively and efficiently assist refugees and migrants in crisis situations. Through JRS's partnerships and programs, with your help, we remain committed to serving, accompanying, and advocating for refugees and migrants everywhere. We're nearing the end of our time together, but we wanted to have the opportunity to let you all ask a few questions. So I would like to ask Mohammed, if you can come back up. You're welcome to ask questions about any part of this afternoon. There are JRS staff members throughout the room with microphones. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and please let us know where you're coming from and who your question is directed towards.
Thank you very much. My name is Maggie McGuinness and I'm representing the British Embassy to the Holy See. I just wanted to say thank you. This has been a fascinating talk, and forgive me while I express or try to express the question that I've got in the back of my head, which is, we've spoken a lot about community and sort of the, Filippo, the sort of bottom-up approach that you want to see being taken. I think in a society that is currently becoming much more fractured and in many ways sort of starting to encourage a certain level of myopism, and forgive me, that's a slightly cynical perspective, but I think it's something that we are seeing more and more often. How can we fight the politics of self-interest when sort of the work that people do here, and we obviously all share a real sort of moral imperative for the work that's being done, what can we do to make sure that this sort of approach is being shared at a time where it is possibly not being listened to as often? Thank you.
Is there a specific who would? Oh, sorry, to Filippo, please.
Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to understand correctly the question. I don't know, this is a very difficult question because you state the reality within your question. You say this self-interest attitude or culture, I don't know how to call it, is so predominant today. It is true. And what can I say? I think that in reality, my observation, my humble observation for many years of this work is that, yes, it is very strong self-interest, but in the world, irrespective of culture, places, geography, there are many examples still of situations in which people do not act on self-interest, but in the interest of other people. I mean, solidarity exists, is very strong actually in so many places, even today, except that I think people with power, and by that I mean, sorry, you're representing a government, I mean governments, I mean big business and so forth, have chosen to ignore somehow and promote and build the self-interest approach much more. Up to a few years ago, there was a more balanced attitude, but I think in recent years, and especially in the past few years, it has shifted in that direction. And that's why I think that the work that JRS does, and other organizations, of course, is so important, not only because it helps people, but it also continues to defend the space within which solidarity is possible. I think this is so important. And it's important beyond what this work does, which is already extremely crucial for the lives of so many people, but it really maintains a space for that. And then the final point I want to make, this is an invitation I have made to governments many times. Do recognize that solidarity exists. People with solidarity vote as well, by the way. So maybe, sometimes to go in their direction a little bit could be useful also for the next election.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, dear.
Hi, we're continuing the British theme. I'm Rachel D'Souza, the Children's Commissioner for England. My job is to protect and promote the rights of children. So I have oversight of children who are refugees, children seeking asylum who arrive at our shores. I see them in asylum hotels. I see them in all sorts of terrible conditions. And I think I really recognise what your description of Western governments playing to negative politics, populist politics, in their own countries. We are about to have our 5th Prime Minister in 5 years. That's as long as I've been doing the job. And so let's have a moment for hope. I've just responded to a consultation that for the first time in many years, a consultation that's proposing detaining children, handcuffing children, asylum-seeking children as part of family returns. I never thought I'd see that, but here we are. But this new Prime Minister is likely to be coming in. What advice would you give him, Felipe, to be positive, how to do this positively and not play to the negative politics? I'll be seeing him in the next couple of weeks, I'm sure. So give me some advice to take back to do this positively.
Well, you have to translate my proposal. It is your job to give a proper answer to him. I start at a very strange point. In 1946, 1 year after the Second World War, there was a very famous process in Nuremberg where the surviving Nazis were sitting in front of international court. And somebody asked Hermann Göring, how was it possible that a cultural nation as German turned to these brutal aspects? And he, in his strange, terrible smiling, told, oh, it was not that difficult. We had to give a lot of fears to this nation. We had to make them fearful and aggressive and to give them a sense of self-defense. And then everything was possible. Perhaps in this dramatic and cynic answer, there is a chance to renew international, national, regional politics to make sure that we all can live fearless, because there are people who recognize our dignity and don't want to make us only be workers and only be consumers and not only accept some propaganda or official meanings, but to be more prepared, to be interested, to listen, to find a lifestyle which is not taking as much as possible, but learning how we can all live together. Perhaps you find some elements for a good translation. Good luck with your new Prime Minister.
Okay. I see that the question may be a bit broad, but I'm interested in any thought that you may have. I just came back from the US and I spoke to many people, and it didn't seem that they were nationalists or racist or anything like that. But there were people worried about, and this deals with Europe also, about grooming gangs, I think they are called, of many migrants of specific religious culture background, which is a thing. And they're worried about the lack of opportunities of the local population. And, they were asking like, and even here in some European states, like, where is the solidarity with us, not the people that come in? The solidarity should be on both sides, right? So you were talking about balanced view. So how to bring about this balanced view if one group speaks with, I mean, this is of course a broader issue, but there are real concerns with of course, migration is something broader, as I said, but again, you may have some best practices that are applied because the challenges are real. Oh, sorry, and I'm a journalist based here in Rome, Bohumil Patrick.
Yeah, and I think you put your finger on a very important issue, because to defend solidarity, to have a welcoming approach, to have
Angel singing.
to have to defend rights, of course, all of that should not make us blind to the real challenges that any population movement poses. These are very real. But I think I want to go back to Andrea's point here. And if I had to advise Mr. Burnham, assuming he's the next prime minister, I think he will, I would say separate addressing real concerns from fostering fear, which is what Goering said. So this is it. The concerns are real, but there is no need, as some politicians do, to present them as a deadly threat, as the destruction of society, as the invasion, all that rhetoric that we hear in the US, in Europe, and so forth. That actually has a double, I want to say it again, does double damage. It does damage the people that become the target of hatred, but also it does not address any of the real concerns of the population in terms of arrival of many people, social problems, inclusion, and so forth. So, it's a double negative, that particular rhetoric, which is presented always as the solution to all the evils of migration. I think I've been really, all my years, I've been trying to say this. That rhetoric doesn't help at all. Let's recognize the real challenges, and they are very real, and let's address them, whether they are in the field of asylum, so these are refugees fleeing war, etc., or whether they are in the field of migration, which I still keep distinct, although there are many overlaps, of course, but migration also has challenges that needs to be addressed, and so on and so forth. So that's my point. It's very, very important. I've always, when I was in office, I always say, don't say that the High Commissioner for Refugees says that this is not a real challenge. It is a very real challenge, but you have to address it with the proper tools.
I would like to add one idea. You saw my humor is strange and my ideas are sometimes complicated, but we listened in the afternoon how difficult war and violence is increasing this individual and worldwide situation. So we have so many psychological, pedagogical knowledge. We know how states can work, but the most important thing that we recognize that every day with new violence, with new war, is giving up new traumatization, and a lot of this violence is a strange and not complicated, immature response to this. I was last year once only in Rwanda and Burundi, and I saw how many years it takes to bring individuals, families, communities, a whole state in a proper work. So this is no answer, no solution, but at least it names the problems and to emphasize, to find complex solutions to all this together.
Thank you. We have time for one last question.
Thank you. My name is Christopher Teixeira, alumni of the American University of Rome. I also interned here for last summer. My question was actually directed toward Mohammed. I just want to ask you, in reflection, following this panel, what do you most take away from it, and what do you want us to take away from it?
Well, thank you so much. It's a very impressive question. Yes, for me as an activist, as a co-founder of Refugees in Libya, the main idea is to bring the voices that people cannot see, cannot heard. The voices were birthed and flew away. We are speaking about the points or the main actions, which is very important, the refugee crisis. We are talking also about the millions, thousands of hundreds who flee every day, like their homes, their loved ones. So the story is based on how we are going to understand. The speech have been made and the stories have been told, but also we agreed that there is solidarity, but the recognition that we are still not heard it, the recognition of the states that can see and accept that these people should be accepted, recognized, should be integrated to the different societies, and we have been heard and listened also, so that these people who fleeing their countries, fleeing their homes, they contribute to the societies that they arrive in too many ways and different. So why is it not possible to make these horrible stories be recognized? When I say recognize it, I mean that people could be open doors to them to go to school, can be integrated to have their families, can be accepted whether in the daily life that we are living. In Rome, for example, or in Paris, we see so much situation also not acceptable. For example, there's a last question asked that even people arrived here and faced some difficulties, stories. Someone can stay into the centers waiting for many years to be accepted, to have been given, which is an ID. So my life or my story could not only limited in a document. Why I should need to come and stay for so many years, even if I face this such horrible situation, coming, seeking for the protection that we are speaking about. Why my asylum seeker could not accept it? Why I should need be, I mean to wait this whole years to spend or to lose my this whole years to only be recognized by a document. I guess this could not be. And the recognition that had been mentioned and we are waiting to be mentioned, it's the state. Even the states cannot take it alone, but it's a work of a general society. It's a work of common European people or common world to understand and to recognize this such a situation. So my story or my speech is, or our goal as refugees in Libya is to bring these atrocities and to recognize it as wider as possible, because we have worked enough, documented and recorded, but the action that to take us toward this such a situation or such a solution had never met. So the idea is to bring, and the journalists or common European people can understand and to be recognized as wide as states could be accepted as. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Our time now has come to an end. I realize that there are many questions, and the great news is that we actually are going downstairs from here for those of you who are in person. So any other questions that you have, please feel free. We'll be together for a few more minutes. That's not a problem. We're really grateful for everyone for your presence here today. For those of you online joining us from all over the world, thank you for tuning in. And for those of you, the end report is here. You can also download it online. And just really thank you for walking with us. Thank you for walking with refugees. Your care and compassion saves lives, as you heard this afternoon. So thank you.